Okay, I'm Tom Baker. I am the new chair of the Gruss committee and a new deputy dean at the law school, following in the very large footsteps of Ed Rock, the former chair of the committee, former deputy dean, who's where we would all like to be at this moment over in Jerusalem, and having an excellent time with the Hagim now, and enjoying now that they're over too. So it is my very great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, who's Professor Arye Edrei from the Tel Aviv University School of Law. He gave two extremely well-received lectures last year, and I'm sure we are going to be enlightened to the same extent this time, and so I ask him to step up and entertain us again, enlighten us again.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, for introducing me. Thank you all for coming. I will start my talk today with a little Talmudic story, I would say an anecdote. I'm not in charge of the microphone. I'll do my best. I will start with a little Talmudic story, say an anecdote. And that Talmudic story from the Babylonian Talmud is happening at the end of the 2nd century, beginning of the 3rd century. And the story is telling us about a rabbi that came or lived in Babylon, and he wants to declare the new months. Traditionally, declaring the new months is an authority that was given to the high court in Jerusalem. So this rabbi in Babylon wants to take the authority and declare the new ones. And the rabbis from Eretz Israel, the rabbis from the land of Israel, are coming down to Babylon to speak to him. And they tell him, you know what? If you want to declare the new months, maybe you should also build yourself a temple here. Why only declare the new months? And they were telling off him about it, and finally, the rabbis of Babylon stepped back from this idea, and it never happened in Babylon, actually, and the rabbis in Jerusalem continued declaring the new months until the middle of the 4th century, and then they moved to a calculated calendar. Now, what is happening in this story? This is a battle over the hegemony. Who has the hegemony over the Jewish people? The rabbis in the land of Israel or the rabbis in Babylon? We have a diasporic community in Babylon that feels secure, strong, and they want to be independent. They don't want to rely on the center in the land of Israel. Usually, the problem of relationship between the diaspora community and the center usually works the opposite way. A diasporic community usually lives with a tension between its desire to become part of the surrounding community in which they live in. They live in a place, they want to become part of that place. And they also want to preserve their own unique and different culture. So think of a little Chinese community in Philadelphia. They live here in Philadelphia, so they want to be Americans. But they also want to preserve their Chinese identity. This is the tension in which they live in. Their ability to moderate this tension very much depends on the relationship they manage to maintain with the center of the community, of the center of the culture in which they come from. If they're able to maintain good connection to the center, if the center in China sends them books, sends them newspapers, if they have access to internet sites, if they get visits from China of intellectuals, of politicians, they be able to maintain their Chinese identity while being also in America. If they don't, so one of two things can happen. One is that they will assimilate. Will assimilate slowly, the surrounding culture will become dominant and they will assimilate. Another option, if they are a very strong community, they might develop their own identity, their own way of the original culture, where they come from, develop it with separated from the way it is being developed in the center. So there will be a subculture of the original culture where they come from. And many factors will influence the ability of the center to maintain its connection to this diasporic community. Of course, we all know that the connection between the center and the diaspora is a main issue, a main question, a main theme in Jewish history. The story that I want to talk about today starts at the 70 CE, the destruction of the temple. As long as the temple exists, despite all the debates and despite all the disagreements, as long as the temple exists, it's a very clear center. Old, respected, well-known, and able to pass messages to the entire Jewish diaspora. The Bible puts the temple at the heart of religious life. The Bible gives authority to the temple. There is no question about the authority of the temple. So Jews go on pilgrimage, they send money, and they receive messages. But the temple was destroyed, and the center disappeared. And there is now a new center. There is no vacuum. There is a new center emerging at the land of Israel. The rabbinic center. The question is this rabbinic center, is this new center accepted by all? Is this rabbinic center can or wish or able to maintain the connections to the entire Jewish diaspora? Sometimes we have this image of the rabbinic center in the land of Israel, which governs the entire Jewish world. I do want to challenge this image, at least to a certain extent. So what I will do now is I will divide my lecture into 4 parts. The first part will be 2 very short introductions, and then I will try to convince you about the split or there is no connection or very limited connection between the rabbis in the land of Israel to parts of the Jewish diaspora. The third part of the lecture, I will try to think about the consequences of this split. And the last part of the lecture, I will try to suggest a reason. Why did this split happen? So my first short introduction is, we said that there is a new center with no vacuum, a center that claims the crown. So just to remind us all, what are we talking about? We're talking about the period of the Tanaim, and later on, the period of the Amoraim. The Amoraim composed the Mishnah, which is the law book that covers all areas in Jewish life, Jewish religious life, and then the Midrash, and the prayer book as we know it, almost as we know it today. And later on comes the period of the Amoraim, which are the following period, and they already composed the Talmud, one Talmud in the land of Israel and the other Talmud in Babylon. This is the period that we talk about, and this is the achievements or the creativity of the period. My second short introduction wants to show what do we mean when we say the diaspora. So we have here a map of the Mediterranean. Let's try work with, do you see that? Can it be seen? So we have here a map of the Mediterranean. This is where I'm lighting now. This is the land of Israel, Jerusalem, and this is the Mediterranean around. And of course, what we see here is the Jewish diaspora going west. We don't see here the Jewish diaspora going east, which is a very important Jewish diaspora. We have seen before the Babylonian Talmud. So going east is Babylon, a very strong and important Jewish community. We see here a map of the Jewish diaspora in the Roman Greco world, which will be the focus of our talk today, the Roman world. All the places that are marked in the map are places that we know of Jewish communities at the time. Many of the Jewish communities, or maybe most of them, existed already at the time of the temple. But of course, after the destruction, slowly, they became bigger and bigger. We know very well that, and we can see this in this map, this is a map of Paul's journeys or Paul's missionary journeys. We know very well from the book of Acts that Paul is traveling west and almost only west, and the different colors that you see here is his different journeys, and he travels from synagogue to synagogue. He travels to Jewish community, he walks into synagogue, and he speaks at each synagogue. So this is what we are talking about. We are talking about the connection between the center at the land of Israel and the Jewish communities, the center of the land of Israel here, and the Jewish communities all around the Mediterranean Sea, mainly at the north shore of the Mediterranean, which is Asia Minor, Greek, and Italy. So after those two introductions, the question is very clear. The question is introduction A plus introduction B. There is a new center, we said, and there is a diaspora. Do they communicate? That's the question. And as I said, I have good reasons to doubt it, and I want to try and convince you with my doubts. Now, the first step I want to go in is I want to listen to the rabbis. Let's put it this way. I want to listen carefully to what the rabbis have to say. Now, I'm not sure that everything that I have to believe them as an historian, that I have to take everything that they say as an historical source. But first, I want to listen to them very carefully because I assume that if someone wants to tell us that he has good connection to the entire Jewish world, it should be the rabbis. And I want to listen carefully to what they have to say. So I will walk through some sources, some examples, and I will walk from the easy to the strong, or less convincing to more convincing, I hope. So here is the first text which I want to read with you from the Midrash. And the rabbis are telling us here that, can it be seen or there is something disturbing here? I hope you can see that the kingship sent 2 spies. They wanted to know what is the Torah. So in order to know what is the Torah, they send 2 spies. Now, of course, which Torah we are talking here? When we talk about the Torah, which Torah we are talking here? We're talking about the oral law, we're talking about the new law, because the Bible is well known already for centuries. The Bible was translated to Greek centuries ago. Everyone can buy it in the next store and read it. If you need to send spies, so we're talking about something new that is coming up, and they are sending spies. Now, from the language, it's only Hebrew here, and we know you see the place they're sending to Usha. Observe the nature of the Torah. They went to Rabban Gamliel in Usha, so we know the person, we know the place, and we know exactly when it's happening. This is a source from the 2nd century. The kingship wants to study, to know what is the nature of the Torah. And if they want to know what is the nature of this new Torah, they have to go to the land of Israel. Don't they have a local rabbi that they can talk to? Don't they have someone in Rome that can teach them something about it? We know that at the time of this source, there are at least 10 synagogues, functioning synagogues in Rome. So the kingship wants to know, they have to send spies, at least according to the rabbis. As I said, you don't have to believe them, but you have to know why would they say it this way. They say only us know. There's no one there that can teach them. They have to come to Usha. Okay. As I said, let's walk to a stronger source. And I find this source a fascinating one. I mentioned before that we have a very complex calendar. The Jewish calendar is a complex calendar, and the court is announcing the new months. Why is that so? Because the calendar is trying to integrate the lunar months with the solar year. So when the new month starts, it has to be declared by the court, whether it's 29 days months or a 30 days months. It has to be declared by the court. And at least according to the story of this Mishnah, of this source, the rabbis in the court, beginning at the Temple Mount, later on when they moved after the destruction to Yavne in the south, and later on up north to the Galil, they declare the new months. And they send messages to all the diaspora. Look, I marked it red. They send the message by flares, fires on the top of the mountains, from mountain to mountain, and they give here the list here, the names of the mountains. Until, that's the end, until, you see with red, until he would see the whole of the diaspora. So, according to the rabbi's imagination, what is the whole of the diaspora? The list of the mountains that we are seeing listed here. Now we know, because I showed you a slide with a map, what is the diaspora. And if we look carefully on the list of the mountains, we discover this map. So I marked yellow here, Jerusalem, and I marked on the map, I only marked the yellow, the map I took from a book, I zeroed from a book, all the mountains that the message is going to. Everything is going east. And when he sees all of the diaspora, as we've seen in the previous slide, the whole of the diaspora, it's the eastern diaspora. Now, what about the Jews in the West? What about the Jews in Asia Minor? What about the Jews in Rome? Don't they have to know when is the new month? Don't they have to celebrate Passover and know when, if it's Passover, it's today or tomorrow? If Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is today or tomorrow, they need to know that. The Mishnah doesn't ask the question, and actually, scholars did ask the question, especially Shaul Lieberman, the great Talmudic scholar, asked the question, and he left it open. He said, I have no idea how to answer this question. So, assuming that we have an historical source here, which is we can use this as an evidence, so we can ask ourselves why the rabbis don't send messengers to the West. Assuming it's not an historical source, why the rabbis don't tell us that they send messengers? Why they don't imagine the Western Jewish communities as part of their community? That's my question. Now, my next source will be, sorry, where I was? Yeah, sorry. Will be rabbis' journeys around the Jewish world. So I will start with rabbi journeys to Rome. There are many sources in the Mishnah which tell us about rabbis traveling to Rome. And we're talking here about the outstanding rabbis of the generations. Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, the outstanding rabbis of the generations. And there are many sources that tell us stories about what happened on the way. They were going on a boat, what happened on the way? And actually, one of the historians, or the leading historians of the period, whom I studied with the history of the period, he wrote, I think, a very interesting article, making all those sources, putting all those sources together, and he claimed that there were two journeys. All the sources get together, come down to two journeys of the outstanding, the leading of the generation, the leading rabbis, the traveling to Rome. So this story that the Mishnah brings us deal with a halachic, with a legal question, which I don't want to go, of course, into the details. It's not so important to us. The legal question is, they were on the boat. They were on the boat, and the question was whether the boat is a private domain or a legal or a public domain regarding the question of can they move on Shabbat or not. So they were coming. It says here the name of the the name of the port that were coming from. It says here Pardesin, right? They were coming from Pardesin, and Pardesin we know very well. This is a well-known port of the time in Italy. The boats from the land of Israel would land here, and people would come out from this port and go to Rome. So the rabbis do go to Rome. Why do they go to Rome? So this is an old tradition that people go, or the leaders go, to speak to the Caesar, to the Caesar. It's still today, right? And it was, and we know it from the time of Judah Maccabee. We have actually source of in the time of Judah Maccabee, and we have sources of rabbis that are traveling at the time of the son of Herod at the about 50, 60 years prior to the destruction. We know that leaders go to Rome to speak to the government. We would assume if there is a huge Jewish community in Rome at the time, rabbis go to Rome, they would speak to the government, and we have from Roman sources, for instance, we know that in one of those two journeys, they were able to cancel a tax law on the Jews in the land of Israel. We know it very well, but we would expect that they would come as they are in Rome, will come to the synagogue, will meet with the rabbis, the local rabbis, will preach the Jews. We expect something to happen. And maybe it did happen. But the only problem is that they give us many stories of what happened to them in Rome. One of the stories is about their interaction with the local Jewish community. The only interaction that we find in the sources is this one. Interaction which is not with the leadership. The only interaction is this one. And let's try to analyze and understand what's going on. It says here, they asked the elders. The elders are the rabbis. So they asked the elders. Here the rabbis are interacting with people that are not official officers, they're not from the government. They're interacting with people. And what do those people what do they have to ask them? You want to read, Natalie? Please.
If he, God, have no desire for idolatry, why does he not destroy it? They made reply to them, if they worshipped a thing for which the world has no need, he would do away with it. But they worship the sun and moon and stars and constellations. Should he destroy his world because of the fools? Okay,
let's stop here. So that's the question. The question is, if God really doesn't like the idols, why don't he destroy them? Now, who asks such a question? Let's try to think. Who is asking the question? It's a sarcastic question. It's not a serious question. It's not coming from a community of believers that ask the rabbis. I would assume that this is the pagans who ask the rabbis, who try to make fun of them. If your God is really so strong and he doesn't like idolaters, why don't he destroy them? And the rabbis are trying to show what kind of answers they gave. Actually, in the Babylonian Talmud, this source appears in a slightly different version where it says that the philosophers ask the elders. So I think it's very difficult to imagine that this kind of question and the way it is recorded here, it's a question that happens in the synagogue from Jews who ask their leader a serious question they want to learn. The rabbis are creating the Mishnah. They are creating the Midrash. Don't they have something to tell the Jews around about what they studied, how they think they observe the law? Don't they have any legal question? How come nothing is recorded in the texts? So I brought through 3 sources to try to convince you. But now I want to go to my fourth and last question or source. And I think this is the most important and interesting one. The Mishnah and the Talmud, the nature of that literature is a collective literature, contrary to the Bible. This is one of the innovations of the rabbis. In the Mishnah, we can identify at least 120 rabbis. We know them by name. We know where they come from. We know where they lived. In the Talmud, we have hundreds. It's a collective work throughout few generations. And the rabbis debate. We saw all the sources. This rabbi say that, the other rabbi say the other things. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. It all starts here. Wasn't the case before. It starts here. It's a collective work. The idea of debate is starting here. In this collective work, with hundreds of rabbis that we know very well by name, there is almost not one rabbi that is coming from the West. How do we explain that? There's no rabbi from Rome, or from Asia Minor, or from Greece. There's no such a rabbi. Why? Now, not only that there's no such a rabbi, there's no institution. The rabbis compose their literature, they compose the Mishnah, they try to spread it out. How do they spread it out? They have institutions where they study, they have a yeshivot. Why don't we know of a yeshiva in any one of those Jewish communities in the West? Actually, we know of 2 rabbis in the West. One of them, his name is Todos. Todos ish Romi. Yeah, this is it. Amar Rabbi Yossi, said Rabbi Yossi, Todos the Roman instructed the people in Rome, so and so. This is what we have from Todos, how he instructed the people in Rome how to do, I don't know exactly what. The Paschal Lamb, the Passover offering. What exactly did he instruct the people in Rome? Now, we know so little about this man that scholars are not sure if this man lived in the 2nd century BCE or in the 2nd century CE. They don't know who he is. They know he existed. They know he taught something to the Jews in Rome, but he's not part of what's happening in the Mishnah. We don't know. We don't know where to locate him. We've known nothing from him. The other rabbi that we know of, sort of, his name is Mattia ben Cheresh. And the Talmud is telling us that the Mattia ben Cheresh went to Rome to establish a yeshiva, to establish a study hall. So this is contrary to my story. I said there are no institutions, no rabbis, and here is a rabbi that he is being transmitted by the rabbis to Rome to start a new yeshiva. Very nice. The only problem is that there is no there's no one nothing left, nothing in the Talmud. There's no one sign, no one statement, not one learning. The Talmud doesn't quote, did he really go? Okay, did he establish the yeshiva there? Did they learn there? What did they learn? Who were the students? Did they say anything? Did they ask any questions? What happened? Maybe he never went. We don't know. All we know that he went. But what happened there? Nothing that happened there ever became part of the discourse. Now we have to remember that in the Talmud, there are thousands, or maybe tens of thousands, of segments that are going from the land of Israel to Babylon, and from Babylon to the land of Israel. The Torah is traveling eastwards all the time. Everything that Rabbi Yochanan said in the land of Israel is being studied in Babylon. And everything that Rav said in Babylon is being studied in the land of Israel. There is an open line of communication to east. And we hear zero, or next to zero, from the west. So, to summarize what I've said until now is the Jewish diaspora, as it can be seen, or as we know the Jewish diaspora from the New Testament, from the archaeology, from the Roman literature, from the pagan literature. The map of the Jewish diaspora is a completely different map than the map we know from the rabbinic literature. There are teachings, many teachings, that go east. We know nothing about what goes west. And paradoxically, if we do have little hints here and there, they teach us about how limited they are and how next to zero they are. The Jewish literature basically don't speak about the Jews in this part of the world until the 8th century. All of a sudden, in the 8th century, there's a huge Jewish community in Europe, and they start to participate in the discourse. Before that, we almost don't know about them. If we look at the Roman literature, we know very much about them from that period. Now, I don't have time to go through all the sources, but the rabbis in the Talmud do travel a lot. There are a lot of places that we see this rabbi traveled here and traveled there, and if we check carefully the sources and draw a map, they travel to the land of Israel, they travel east, and they travel around. Little bit north, little bit to Syria, northern to Lebanon. This is where they travel. This part of the world, they travel for political reasons, as I said, but not for Torah study or Torah teaching. So now I said that I'm coming now to the third part of my talk, and as I said, in that part of my talk, I want to try to think about the consequences. If I'm right, I cannot be sure that I'm right, but if I'm right, that there is a split here, what could be the consequences? Or what are the consequences? So I said that the rabbis, after the destruction, have created a new center. And I think that it's not questionable that they have responded to the destruction with an unprecedented degree of creativity and fortitude. After this catastrophe of the destruction, they gathered, they have composed the Mishnah, which is an impressive piece of literature. They have invented new rituals which will replace the rituals of the temple that could not be observed anymore. How will we celebrate Passover after the destruction? How will we celebrate Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, after the destructions? We have no high priest anymore. How will this be observed? The rabbis of the time responded to that with an impressive amount of creativity and courage, as I said. So if we take, for example, the Passover, how Passover was celebrated prior to the destruction, we know very well. There is the sacrifice, the offering of Passover, and, of course, a family meal with Hallel, with psalms, singing, dancing, and eating, whether if you are in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, you sacrifice the Paschal lamb. If you're not, you're not. We don't have that. After the destructions, the rabbis are coming up with a new idea of text. The text that they are creating, the text to read a text and a storytelling during the night to give the substance to the evening is a new idea of the rabbinical time, of the rabbis. What about Yom Kippur? The same. They have new prayers which replace the worship of the high priest in the temple. And if I talk about Yom Kippur, so we might want to talk about prayers in general. Prayers, the idea of prayers as a medium of ritual into itself is a post-destruction idea. Before that, prayers goes together sometimes with the sacrifice. Prayers is something that's supposed to be spontaneous. It comes from your heart. The idea of prayer in the synagogue, structured prayers, set prayers, with a closed text in a certain time that needs to be said, is a new idea of that period of those rabbis. If we want, there are so many sources about that, but I just picked up one source about that just to give you a little bit of taste of what's going on at that period. So, Rabban Gamliel, so this is in Yavne, the first generation of the Tanaim. So Rabban Gamliel says, each day one should recite the prayer consisting the 18 benedictions. So he wants to say the 18 benedictions every day. The 18 benedictions, those we know today, the Shmoneh Esrei. Rabbi Eliezer says, one who recites his prayers in a routine manner, this is no good. He doesn't believe in this way. And there are two opinions in the middle of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Akiva, who takes a middle way. Depends if you know it, if you don't know it, sometimes. Now, when you have many opinions, it indicates that this is the formative time of this prayer. This is the formative time. They are talking. What should be our law? How should we organize our new prayers? And there are many indications in Talmud that they actually wrote those 18 benedictions, and they discuss this one, that one, and now they are discussing what should be the law. Rabbi Eliezer, this rabbi, is known, and he says it about himself, as a conservative rabbi. He doesn't like many innovations. And he's saying, I've never said something I've not heard from my rabbi. He's very conservative. And he's holding into the old way. He says, this concept of set prayers that you come to the synagogue and read from the book, I don't believe in it. Now, of course, you can say that because this is something that's being innovated, being created at that time by those rabbis. Excuse me. What I'm saying from the examples that I brought is basically that the idea of the Judaism of the rabbis is that they put the text in the center. The text is in the center of the religious life. The text is in the center of the rituals. The text is the center, replacing the center that was destroyed. If prior to the destruction, you would think of Jerusalem, what's happening in Passover at that night, even if you couldn't be there, everyone would focus to the center. So now, everyone is reading the same text. And this is what makes us a community. Every synagogue will say the same prayers. This is what makes us the community. They have the Mishnah, they have the Midrash, they have the prayer book. Everything that they have created is around the text. They invented, the idea is that the center is the text. And I'm asking if I was right in the previous part of my talk, that the Jews in the Western diaspora did not receive that. What does it mean? You remember the marks I brought at the beginning. I said at the beginning of the opening remarks, are they still one community? If they did not receive those messages, if they did not receive the prayer book and the Mishnah, are the Jews in the West and Jews in the East still one community, or they have separated? That's the question. Now, I'm coming to the closure of my speak, right? I need to finish in a few minutes. So I'm coming to the most important part of my talk. And I want to try and suggest what are the possible reasons. Why did it happen? Did the rabbis neglect those Jews? Or did those Jews did not want any connections with the rabbis? What exactly happened? I want, in order to try to give my suggestion, I want to remind ourselves a few facts, which I think are very important. In the Western diaspora that we see now again on the map, we found over 100 stone inscriptions in synagogues. Stone inscriptions in synagogues, over 100. There are all with no one exception in Greek. There's no one word in Hebrew, or there's no even words that reminds us of some concept of the rabbinic literature. It's all biblical words in Greek, with no exception. All scholars agree that the Torah was read in the synagogues in the West in Greek. We know the Septuaginta, the Bible was translated to Greek already 500 years ago, the 3rd century BC. So all scholars agree that the Torah was read in the synagogue in Greek. They debate whether, along with the Greek, it was read also in Hebrew. Some scholars believe that it was read also in Hebrew, but all scholars agree that it was mainly read in Greek. We have gravestones in Rome, Jewish cemeteries from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. We have a cemetery, we have gravestones. Most of the writing is in Greek. There are words in Hebrew which are repeating itself. The same few words in every gravestone, but not real writings in Hebrew. On the contrary, the Mishnah is in Hebrew. The prayer book is in Hebrew. Now, it's not only that it is in Hebrew. Think about this fact. The Bible was translated to Greek centuries ago. The Mishnah was never translated for over 12 centuries. Never translated. How do you explain this? The Bible was translated to Aramaic, was translated to Greek. The Mishnah, the prayer book, was never translated. For centuries, never translated. How do you explain it? Now, it's not only that. in the Mishnah, we have many Greek words because the richness of the Mishnah, it deals with all aspects of life, from civil law to family law to agriculture. All aspects of life are dealt in the Mishnah. The Hebrew was not rich enough, so they would have words for everything. So they absorb Greek words into the Hebrew. In the prayer book that was composed by the same rabbis at the same time, the prayer book that we know today, there is no one Greek word. There's not one word. This is not an happiness. This must be on purpose. So if I put together all this information, I suggest that the Jews in the West could not decode the rabbinic literature. They could not have access to it. It was in Hebrew. They knew only Greek. It was in Hebrew, and it was not translated. And the rabbis did not allow its translation. They opposed its translation. They disagreed to translate their literature. Now, of course, you would ask me, why? Why didn't the rabbi make sure that it will be translated for the Jews in the West? So let me show you my last slide. Now, this is taken from Midrash Tanchuma. Midrash Tanchuma is a later Midrash. And of course, it's a question whether I can bring this as a proof to the period I'm talking about. It's a Midrash from the 8th century, but the sources of Midrash are earlier sources, and I do want to use the rabbi that is talking here, Rav Yehuda Bar Shalom, is from the 3rd century. And I want to see what does this say. Maybe Natalie, you'd read for me, because
Rabbi Yehuda Bar Shalom said, when the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moshe, write for you, Moshe asked that the Mishnah be given in writing. However, because God foresaw that the nations of the world would eventually translate the Torah and read it in Greek, saying that they are Israel, the claims on both sides thus far being equal, the Holy One, blessed be He, said to the nations, you say that you are my children? All I know is that those by whom my mysteries reside are my children. What is that? It is the Mishnah that was given orally.
So I think we have an echo here of the debate with the Christianity. The rabbis are telling us God foresaw that the nation of the world will eventually translate the Torah. The rabbis lost control over the Bible. It was taken by the Christians. They lost control. They say they have their interpretation. They know it better. It's no more Jewish literature. It's an international literature. How should we, as a small community, preserve our culture and not allow it to become an international literature? So the rabbis are saying, we will not allow any translation. Only those who have my mysteries are my children. So if the Christians of the time chose to, to increase, to upgrade their literature by attaching it to the Bible and making it one code, the rabbis are responding to that process by transmitting their code into a mysterious, into something that only those who are members to that community can have access. They realized that in a diasporic time that they live on, without a separate language, they will not be able to exist as a separate culture or a separate religion. Thank you very much. If you have time for that, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, so we have time for some questions. I'll call on people, and I'm going to ask the first question, which is, what is the lesson for Jewish scholars today who write in English?
Tom, I would stay there. And I think this is the question you should answer, not me. I don't know. I just brought the sources from the 2nd century, 3rd century. Now, what is the lesson? It's you are an American Jew. You live here, you write here. Tell me what is your lesson? I don't know.
That 300 years from now, they're not going to be reading us in English.
What? You know that Maimonides, just a short response, it's very interesting that Maimonides started to write in Arabic, or in Judeo-Arabic. His first works, he wrote in Judeo-Arabic. And then, what? Yeah, also Moreh Nevuchim, this is true. But before he wrote his code, he writes in his introduction that he was thinking in which language should he write it. And he have decided to write it in Hebrew. He said, I'm writing it in Hebrew because all the Jews in the world needs to read it. And he said, Nichamti, I regret that in my early works, I wrote in Arabic. And as a matter of fact, and I think this is fascinating, the Jewish bookshelf, until the 19th century, is only in Hebrew. We think about the revival of the Hebrew in the modern time. It's true that the Hebrew was revived as a spoken vernacular, but not as a writing language. Jews wrote only in Hebrew. And those who did not write in Hebrew, there were some. So what happened to those writings is one of two. One option is that it was right away translated, like Maimonides. Maimonides, in his saw his works translated. Those who were not right away translated were lost to the Jews. This is a fact, like Shlomo ben Gavirol, or most few others, or some of the Gaonim works. So maybe you have an answer.
Push the button on the mic so that we pick you up. Yeah.
I think you are right, but it seems to me that that the confrontation started much earlier, and the problem was that the Greek culture was a real threat for the Jews. So you can say that what started at the time of the Maccabees went on and on until the Jewish community in the whole of the Western Greek-influenced cultural diaspora simply disappeared. But it started at the time of the Maccabees, and not when the temple was destroyed.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I started with this remark that a community in the diaspora always live with this tension. If they live in Greek, it's because they believed in the Greek culture and they saw it as something big. But still, they have a synagogue. Still, they want to preserve their separate culture. We're not talking about Jews who assimilated. We are talking about Jews who did organize themselves in Jewish communities. And we know from Christian literature and from Roman literature of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th century, we know of the Jewish communities there. We don't know about them from Jewish literature. So I assume that one of the possibilities that what happened to those Jews, that maybe slowly they have assimilated. And that's one possibility, absolutely.
In the back, yeah.
You talk about the exclusiveness of the text and the exclusiveness of the Hebrew language. Can you tell us a little bit about the quality and the nature of Hebrew language in these books that you mentioned, of which you read, or the literature that you referred to?
I'll quote two. It's a big question. It's very difficult to answer, and it's not my specialty. But let me quote two of the great Hebrew writers in history. And I apologize for putting them together. They're very different and it's distance in time, but two great Hebrew writers, Maimonides and Chaim Nachman Bialik. Lahavdil. Okay, but both of them are great writers. Both say that without the Hebrew of the Mishnah, they could not write in Hebrew. The Mishnah increased the level of the Hebrew so much that it could not be revived or used as a written language without the Mishnah, assuming we had only the Bible. Thousands of words and ways of using the words and so on and so on. Now, as I said, the Mishnah has thousands of Greek words. This is true, and this happens always. But the Mishnah, how do you say, Hebreized them, they became part of the Hebrew. I mean, here in the law school, I mean, the legal words are hundreds of Greek legal words that became part of the Mishnaic Hebrew. But still, it's fascinating, rich literature in terms of language. That's the way I think. That's the way I see it.
Here and then here, yeah.
Two questions. First, how does the presence of Aramaic in the prayers fit into your theory and into the midrash that you have showing us in front of us? Because it's not Hebrew. It may look like Hebrew, but it isn't. And the second question is, are you implying, and I know nothing about it to be able to judge it, are you saying that all the Jews in the West died out and a new group of Jews came in that led to Maimonides?
Okay. So let's, first of all, here there's no one word in Aramaic as far as I can judge.
No, but it talks about the mysteries, meaning presumably referring to what's written in Hebrew.
Right.
Not Aramaic.
Not Aramaic. Hebrew. Now, in the prayers, there's no Aramaic. There's no only in the Kaddish, which is a very later paragraph that was added. In the prayer book at the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, there is no one word in Aramaic or one word in Greek. Only very little Aramaic in little paragraphs that were added later. And the same with the Haggadah of Passover. We have only Halachmania, which is the opening paragraph, which is a Babylonian paragraph that was added later.
There's something before the Torah is taken out that's in Aramaic.
Yeah, here and there, little paragraphs that are Babylonians paragraphs that were added later.
Okay.
But the main Siddur, the main prayer book, is Hebrew. In the 18 benedictions, in the Kriyat Shema and Birchotea, all those main prayers that were constructed by the rabbis in the Mishnah in Tractate Brachot, speaks about them. There's no one word in Aramaic and not one word in... Now, it is true that, many things that connected that are missing in my lecture because I had only 50 minutes. So I should have mentioned the issue of Aramaic, which is different from Greek. And I think for many reasons. First of all, Aramaic and Hebrew are sister languages. They're close by nature. Second, they go east. They don't go to the Greco-Roman world where the rabbis debate with. The Christianity goes west. This is the fear. This is the echo that we hear here. Paul goes west. The rabbis goes east. They have no theological debate in the east. So there the issue is not as strong. But also in Babylon, they study the Mishnah all the time. The Mishnah is the cornerstone for the Babylonian Talmud, right? They never translated the Mishnah. They never translated the prayer book. It's only in Hebrew and remained. So they had to know Hebrew. They study the Mishnah all the day. They might be speaking in Aramaic, but they never translated their literature.
Maimonides wrote in Hebrew and Arabic. Isn't it the fact that one major reason why he wrote some of his works in Arabic is because Hebrew did not
It might be the case with philosophical, and he actually wrote the Moreh Nevuchim, the books for perplexed. He wrote it in Arabic, but he wrote his code in Hebrew, beautiful, beautiful Hebrew, with no one Arabic word, and he managed. He wasn't missing one word. So, and this code is still on our shelf, and it's a great example of avant-garde in Hebrew until today.
Jerome.
One thought is that Sefer Hamada, Mishnah Torah, he does talk about, he uses some Greek words at the very beginning. He has to, which is, I think, the point.
But he himself didn't know Greek, most probably.
No, but
He didn't know Greek.
He's using some, I think, if I think back on what's in there, I think there are some Greek words that have come in through his Arabic in order to express the philosophical concepts that you couldn't express in Mishnah.
You know, the famous statement of Maimonides about Aristotle, Shma ha'emet mimi she'amara. All right? You must receive the truth from whoever said it. So if Aristotle said the truth, you must listen to Aristotle. So of course. Yeah.
You stress the fact that Chazal did not translate the Siddur and did not translate the mission. But they didn't, at least voluntarily, we have a midrash about how it happened, translate Tanakh either. It's up to them. I think the suggestion in Megillah about how they feel about translations is there wouldn't have been one about either.
You know, this is very interesting. It's thank you for the question. I devoted my lecture today is based on a book I wrote about this issue, and I devoted a chapter to this issue that you are raising. And I analyzed carefully the sources, and what you find is that the rabbis are treating the day of the translation of the Bible to Greek as a feast, as a day of celebration in Megillat Ta'anit. And only later on, in the 8th century, it's becoming a day of fast. In Megillat Ta'anit Batra, the story turns. They talk about the day of the translating the Bible to Greek as a day of miracle, that they have this legend of the 70 people at the day of a miracle that everything was translated so well. And it is a day of, it's a day. No. Well, this is only because we read already the Talmud according to later on after they changed their mind. In Megillat Ta'anit Batra, it's a day of fast, the day that the Bible was translated. In the early sources, it's not. Now, it is true that you have to realize they have got nothing to do about it. The Bible was translated to Greek years before they came about. I mean, we're talking about rabbis in the end of the 1st century, 2nd century. The fact that the Bible is translated to Greek is a fact. They cannot debate the fact. It's a fact. But they can be happy or not. They can also try to influence which translation to use. And Rabbi Akiva is trying to say, use Aquila's translation, because Aquila's translation is closer to his ideas. So,
I just want to observe that the book that Arye referred to is in German, so we're all going to have a lot of access to it.
Well,
but Ralph can read it for us.
it's also seals in the alphabet. Maybe it's going about.
Like that. It is interesting that in the midrash here on the wall, God himself has to use a Latin word.
Which is the word?
Mystery.
Mystery. Thank you for this comment. Nice.
We have time for a couple more? Yeah.
I would like to ask again the question that was asked over here that kind of slipped through the cracks. The Jewish community in the West in the 8th century.
I didn't answer this question. Oh, thank you, Michael.
Were they the descendants of the earlier community, or were they immigrants?
So thank you, Michael. I forgot to answer your second question. I'm sorry. So first of all, I don't know how many of you know Michael Korasik, but this is regarding your question. Michael is now translating the Mikraot Gdolot from Hebrew to English. So it's very relevant, relevant to our talk. And he's teaching Hebrew at Penn, classical Hebrew. The answer to your question, Michael, and to your question, I'm sorry, is that I don't know.
Thank you.
Is that I don't know. And nobody knows. What I know is that when I went when I studied history at the university, every book in the history of the Jews in Europe starts at the 9th century and devotes the first 5 pages to the 9 centuries prior to the beginning of the book. How did Jews come to Europe? We don't know. We have this legend. We have that legend. All history books that I had to read in university starts this way. History books about the history of the Jews in Europe. Right? If it was Avram Grossman, it was Chaim Ben Sasson, whoever wrote. As a matter of fact, there's a beautiful book just came out by Sarah Tzfatman talking about the legends of the Jews in Europe, about legends of how they came to Europe. From founding, what we call founding stories, what do we call it?
Origin stories, yeah.
So what happened? Many options. One option is that they survived, the Jews in Europe survived as biblical Jews for centuries. That's an option, that they survived as biblical Jews for centuries, because we find them in Christian literature still in the 5th and 6th century. They talk about the community, they talk about Passover night, whether you're allowed to do it with Jewish family or not, the Christians, in Italy. And as I said, in the Jewish literature, we don't know those Jews. So maybe they survived as biblical Jews for centuries until Jews immigrated to this part of the world and swallowed them. Maybe they assimilated into the Christian world. Maybe part and part. I have no idea.
In the back.
Your analysis very heavily leans on this being a matter of rabbinic decision.
Say it again?
The analysis of your talk makes it very heavily a matter of a rabbinic decision to stick with Hebrew in the communities that it influenced. Isn't it perhaps a matter of rabbinic decision adapting to the real determinant effect of geography and distance and technology, in that as you cross Anatolia and Asia Minor and the Eastern and Western Mediterranean, it's simply a different language area which would not have access to this literature in the original, too far away and beyond the control of rabbinic authority?
Well, basically what you're saying is what I've said. I mean, but if they wanted, they could try and translate their literature and transmit it. I mean, Romans had a very good ways to cross the Mediterranean. We know. I mean, it wasn't a problem at that time. So you might be right.
All right, I have 2 questions pending from 2 friends. So we'll each ask the question, and then you'll answer both of them, and then we'll go eat. So Bob, and then I.
You talk some about rabbis going to Rome.
Say it again?
You talk some about rabbis going to Rome occasionally,
right,
and traveling west. What about people who went the other way, from Rome to Eretz Israel? Do we have any records of that happening, and what they saw and what they thought?
Almost nothing, I think. I think almost nothing.
There must have been people who went.
There must have been, but the Talmud don't record it. And I'm asking why.
Yeah, but if they went, you would think it might be recorded at the other end, when they came back to Rome. Oh, we made this trip, and look at all the stuff we saw.
I did not find sources. As a matter of fact, scholars have shown that the Greek inscriptions in the synagogues, there is also Greek inscriptions in the synagogues in the land of Israel. I mean, it's not that it's only in the Greek diaspora. Also the land of Israel, in the synagogues we find. But scholars have shown that in the synagogues in the land of Israel, we find, of course, this we know, we don't need scholars for that. We have Hebrew and Greek. But that the Greek in the land of Israel is very much different from the Greek in Greek, which means the Greek in the land of Israel has concepts which are rabbinic concepts. So if Jews came, if they studied, rabbis, the Talmud don't record it. It doesn't tell us, which is interesting. It's fascinating.
Yeah, but I mean, the language difference is not insuperable.
I agree.
The cultural difference isn't insuperable.
I agree, and you have to remember that the rabbis themselves knew Greek, at least some of them. They themselves knew Greek. That's a part that must be remembered, which makes the story even stronger.
We're not going to go this way. How do we know people didn't push from the other side, or why they didn't push from the other side?
I agree. It's many questions here still are not resolved, but I still believe that because of the destruction of the center, it's not only the destruction of a temple, it's also a destruction of a center. So leadership must think, what should replace the center? We always know there's so many books, history books, that speaks about the creativity of the rabbis in replacing the religion, the rituals. But I was trying to focus on the creativity of the rabbis in replacing the center, the idea of a nation. And I think the language plays a very serious role here. That's at least my suggestion. That's the way they understood it.
Thank you all for attending. Thank you very much, Arye, for
Thank you very
inviting
much.
us.